So welcome to the second half of our Sangha Morning. Welcome if you're watching on YouTube. If you have heard the talk I gave last week on Buddhism and the Triratna Buddhist community, you may remember that I talked about the importance of friendship as one of the distinctive emphases of Triratna. And I also mentioned that the Buddha in the Upada Sutta talks about spiritual friendship as the whole of the spiritual life. And one of the questions for our group discussions was about, could we imagine spiritual friendship as the whole of our spiritual life? So since last week, I've had interesting conversations about spiritual friendship and personal reflections as well. And perhaps some of you have been pondering on it as well. So today, my talk is on friendship as the heart of the Sangha. So there are many strands to friendship as the heart of the Sangha, many possible personal reflections. Perhaps some questions will arise for you. Years ago, a friend of mine, when we'd had a conversation about spiritual friendship, she said to me, well, where is this spiritual friendship? Show it to me. So she clearly hadn't seen it manifest in the Sangha, or perhaps her expectations hadn't been met. Perhaps her expectations were too high. So I think it's worth our while to be clear about our expectations and whether they are reasonable. Given that the Sangha is made up of, in the Buddha's words, ordinary run-of-the-mill persons. And if it is true that friendship is the heart of the Sangha, then we need to know what spiritual friendship is. So I found two lists. Actually, I found more than two lists. I found many lists, but I've just picked two lists of characteristics of spiritual friendship. So one list comes from the Pali canon texts, and another, which is in fact two lists from a Mahayana text called the 37 Practices of Bodhisattvas. And I thought it would be interesting to go into the details of the lists, compare them, and just notice the overlap. Now, we have altogether 24 qualities, so obviously I haven't time to talk about each one in great detail. But anyway, here's the Pali Canon list of faith, moral virtue, learning, charity, effort, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. So a spiritual friend, one would expect a spiritual friend to exhibit these qualities, or at least some of them. So the list begins with faith. Faith in the three jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Our teacher Sangharachita calls faith as the fundamental positive emotion. So this is not faith in the Christian sense, but it's confidence and trust built on our own experience. So a spiritual friend has confidence that her or his objects of faith, that is the three jewels, are completely reliable, will never let one down. So the Sangha, as one of the three jewels, is, not the Sangha that we have around us, but the noble Sangha, the Arya Sangha, the Sangha made up of those who have reached at least the stage of stream entry in their spiritual development. So only such persons, only the noble Sangha, are entirely trustworthy. Those of us below that stage cannot ultimately be relied upon. So the second characteristic is moral virtue. So this is someone who diligently practices ethics, has the precepts as guidelines for their life, for whom the ethics of their private moments are no different from their public ethics. And in fact, unshakable faith and perfect ethics are indeed the qualities of a stream entrant. The perfect ethics here doesn't mean that a stream entrant never breaks a precept, just that they are compelled, they feel compelled to confess immediately that breach. So then the third characteristic is learning. And what might that mean? Well, I think it means a sufficient knowledge of the Buddha's teaching and a continued willingness to keep learning. So in our terms, it might be somebody who always has a Dharma book on the go and is excited about the discoveries she or he makes in that book, and then puts those discoveries into practice. A spiritual friend is charitable. So charity here meaning benevolence, arising out of noticing and empathizing with another's distress and acting on it, whether that distress is material, emotional, or spiritual. So we could call this compassion, but I prefer charity. This compassion is such a highfalutin kind of quality. So if we use that, we might just not see the many everyday acts of kindness that are around us. So the last four characteristics on this Pali Canon list coincide with the last four limbs of the Noble Eightfold Path. And so you could read about those four qualities. Or perhaps you've already studied them in Mitra study. So there's Sangharakshita's book, Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path, for you to peruse. But briefly, a spiritual friend needs to have, firstly, effort, that is, energy, and mindfulness. So without effort or energy, nothing much will happen. And their mindfulness tends to have a rather static quality, lacking feeling. With energy, but not enough mindfulness, that energy can be a little out of control and can lead to unskillfulness. So the two, effort, mindfulness, need to be present together and in balance. And then finally, a spiritual friend engages wholeheartedly in meditation, and those meditation experiences are informed by wisdom. So as I said, my Mahayana list is actually two lists in one. It's a list of 10 characteristics of a spiritual friend as a teacher and 6 more of a spiritual friend as a student. So this list comes from a tradition where the teacher-student or the guru-disciple relationship is very important. And in the Mahayana tradition, there are a number of these vertical relationships between, say, preceptor, preceptee, Dharma instructor and student, meditation or ritual, teacher and student, and so on. We don't have to relate to these lists in that hierarchical sense. I think the qualities on the two lists are interesting in themselves and worth cultivating for all of us. So here then is the first list. Starting with disciplined in practicing ethics, calm, very peaceful, rich in scriptural knowledge and wisdom. I'll stop there for a minute I'll come to the rest of the list a bit later. So the first quality, disciplined in practicing ethics, I already talked about as moral virtue. So Mahayana seems to take faith as given, or perhaps moral virtue is seen as the most important quality in a teacher. So then we have calm. So this refers to concentration, in other words, meditation, which was also on that first list. So through their meditation practice, the spiritual friend calms the distracted mind and the disturbing emotions. The third characteristic is very peaceful, and this approximates to mindfulness. It's an ability to stay with what is without speculation and mental proliferation, thereby pacifying our disturbing attitudes. And then fourthly, a spiritual friend is rich in scriptural knowledge. So I discussed that as learning earlier on. And then wisdom, again, was on that earlier list. And as I said, is the last limb of the Noble Eightfold Path. So far, there isn't anything new or different on this list. And no doubt the Mahayanists referred to earlier sources as they came up with these characteristics. So moving on to the next 5 characteristics then. Knowledge exceeding the students in those matters in which the student seeks guidance. Wisdom and skill in presenting the teachings and guiding others. Love and compassion as their motivation for teaching. Untiring in their efforts to help students. And patient in teaching and guiding students and able to bear their ingratitude. We are all so these, just to say, these remaining 5 characteristics are more about the qualities of a teacher, but we don't need to see them only as such. So if we help out on class teams, for example, or even if we've been coming along only for a short time to classes, we still may come across someone newer than us, say in our discussion group, and we may know more than they do, and then we can share what we know. So I think these qualities are as relevant to us as they are for the so-called teacher. So then finally, we have our last little list of 6 qualities of a student. Open-mindedness, intelligence, enthusiastic effort, cherishing the teacher more than our own body and life, pleasing the teacher through our ethical conduct, and pleasing the teacher by practicing the teacher's instructions. But we are all in a position of a student. We all need to stay open-minded, curious, never closing off the teachings, thinking I've heard this before, so I haven't any more to learn from it. There's always more to learn, even in the very basic teachings. So intelligence then, here doesn't mean intellectual cleverness, but more a kind of emotional, intuitive understanding of the Dharma, the staying alive to how the teachings enhance and inform our life. So enthusiastic effort, well, enthusiasm is a great quality in all of us. So we need to keep our enthusiasm alive for meditation, for study, even after doing it for years or even decades. So then cherishing the teacher more than our own body and life. Well, it's one of those typical grand Mahayana statements. But it is also a reminder that our spiritual friend may not always be around. So certainly I have come to cherish my preceptor more after she died than when she was still alive. I used to visit her in Cambridge, and I deeply regret that often in my mind I complained about the drive back late at night. And now, of course, I would do that journey uncomplaining every week if only she was alive again. So we can please our spiritual friend by endeavoring to be as skillful as we can be, and by taking her or him seriously, should they suggest some way for us to move forward spiritually. So this is not slavishly taking on everything suggested to us, but listening carefully with an open mind. And then it's up to us to reflect on it and decide for ourselves whether to follow the suggestions. So here we have then, in brief, a formidable array of qualities to cultivate. And it makes you tired just looking at all those lists. But the idea is, of course, not to try to do all of it at once, but rather to look into ourselves honestly, to see where work is needed in order for us to become an excellent spiritual friend. So I'll just finish with a few verses from the Ganda Vyuha Sutra. So they remind us and highlight for us what a blessing our spiritual friends are, and what a blessing we can be for our spiritual friends. So minded by my spiritual friends, I do not overstep the precepts. Guarded by my spiritual friends, I do not come under the sway of bad influences. Attended by my spiritual friends, I become alert and heedful in my practices. Assisted by my spiritual friends, I cannot be crushed by any misfortune. Roused by my spiritual friends, I do not give up my undertakings. In association with my spiritual friends, I develop all the elements of enlightenment.